Morning everybody, and welcome to day 25 of this month of daily language diary videos. We are almost at 30 days, which is incredible. And for today's episode, I decided to not do a daily question, but I actually want to just take a little bit of time to discuss some of my own sort of language learning failures with you. Now, the word failure is not perfect here. The reason why I'm using it is that, first of all, it does sort of encompass in a single word the general idea of not accomplishing something that we hoped for or not managing to do something quite as we would have liked. But I'm also using that word because I specifically want to communicate how this happens to all of us. Now, in a recent episode, I explained how I've had the real luxury and pleasure of spending quite a lot of time with some truly spectacular polyglots over the years. And I haven't met a single one of them who hasn't also experienced a whole variety of similar quote-unquote failures with languages over time. And so this is just another piece of my effort to really humanize polyglots. And I hope through this honest discussion, it will just help some of you realize that when you have these same ups and downs, they really are the same ups and downs that all of us go through, and they are not really failures, they're just a part of the natural course of learning a language, or especially learning several languages. So we're going to talk about a few different sort of types of these quote-unquote failures. So first up, we have languages that I learned to really high levels at one time and haven't quite managed to maintain those skills at the level that they once were. So the two top examples, of course, are Japanese and French. Now, as many of you will know, those are both languages that at one time I could definitely have a very strong argument for claiming a sort of C2 level. In fact, in Japanese, I did take the C2 equivalent exam, which is the N1, and I actually passed many of those sections quite easily. The listening comprehension section in particular, I passed with flying colors, but I was too slow in the reading section, and you have to pass every section to get the N1. But this is about so much more than those exams. I think in both the case of French and Japanese, the level of depth in terms of just the absolutely teeny tiny finer nuance of language and speech, I really did just go so deep into both of those languages. Also knowing things like different dialects in Japanese and being familiar with regional jokes and being able to make somebody from one region of Japan laugh in a different way than someone from a different region because I was so familiar with the different things that those people found funny. When I was at the height of my French studies, I remember being on a bus ride down the east coast of the United States, and I was in like a little booth with a French couple. And there was a moment a few minutes into the conversation where they sort of asked me in a little bit of disbelief, like, wait, you're not French, right? Are you? Now, I'm not claiming that my French was perfect then. I'm not claiming that I sounded like a native speaker. But the point is, that's sort of the Holy Grail of learning a language, right? Like at that particular moment in that specific conversation, there were a few minutes where I may have fooled them, and even when they started to notice something isn't quite right, there was some room in that question they asked me where perhaps they could have believed that maybe I was a native speaker, but perhaps I had an interesting story, maybe I'd grown up somewhere else. For me personally, when we talk about reaching these really high levels or sort of near native levels, those are the types of experiences that I hope to have. But the fact is, I have failed to maintain those levels in those languages. I would say I still speak French very well. I still speak Japanese pretty well. In particular, a certain level of comfort and rhythm that has stayed with me. But there is no question, I'll be the first person to tell you honestly, both those languages, they are nowhere near the level that they once were. Now, if we look at Italian, my Italian was never as good as my French or my Japanese, not really even close. But there was a time when my Italian was really starting to get really good. I had actually made a particularly just delightful friendship with somebody down in Salento in the south of Italy, and through various consequences, I had actually 2 or 3 really close friends who all lived in that exact same region. And Italian's a language where I was actually having a ton of communication with these people who I had become really close with, to the point where when I actually did encounter some people from northern Italy, for example, they could tell that I had been speaking Italian with people in the south. They actually could tell that I had this accent that was quite particular to that region of Italy. And when I went to go and live in Italy, I lived in Genova in the north of Italy only for about a month. It was quite short. I was even starting to be able to make jokes about the way people talked in different regions of Italy, and it was really, really fun. And again, today my Italian is nowhere near the level that it was at that time. So there's one genre of sort of failures in language learning where I have these languages where I reached a really, really high level. Spanish also falls into the same category. And at the moment, today, I don't speak those languages as well anymore. The next genre of failure are these languages where I was very, very close to breaking through into these sort of echelons where it starts to become a lot easier to maintain languages, where they deteriorate a lot more slowly. And for me, these are Swedish, German, and Portuguese. There have literally been 2 or 3 times where I made a big effort and I really did boost my level in all 3 of those languages to where they really did start to get pretty good. I would really start to say I was speaking them fairly comfortably, and I could tell that I was just on the edge of really just being on a rocket ship with my fluency in those languages. But I never quite managed to get them past that point, and so every time I get there, they sort of deteriorate again if I don't keep up my study in those languages. Now, a third genre of sort of language learning failures are languages that I actually just stopped learning. So for me, the biggest example there is Dutch. I've mentioned recently how whenever I say I speak 8 languages, and I'm learning my 9th with Mandarin Chinese, I don't include languages that I don't feel like I could claim to actually speak. Now, Dutch is a language that there was a time when I really was starting to reach a sort of rudimentary level of fluency. I was able to go and actually converse with people, exchange small talk, but also starting to get compliments on my accent and my pronunciation and like my ability to sort of have a good rhythm speaking Dutch. But if I try to speak Dutch today, it's gonna come out as some sort of like weird mixture of Swedish and German and like lots of guttural sounds. And that's because in the case of Dutch, I made a conscious choice to stop studying Dutch for the foreseeable future. But there are also other languages where I really did learn a considerable amount. So I also learned quite a bit of Farsi at one point. When I was living in Hamburg, my 2 closest friends that I made were both from Iran, and so I had such a delightful time learning Farsi, and it was so nice to see how grateful and excited they were every time I would improve my Farsi. So what happened then? What's the reason why all of this came to be? And what does it all mean right now? Well, there are a few things that happen. Some of them are just kind of unfortunate chains of circumstances, and if you follow this channel for a while, you have been here through a lot of that. There are some of you, people like Steven Knapper, people like Sam Nizardo, there are several other names, people who have really been with me on this channel, leaving comments, sending emails, being so supportive. They bought my book on day 1, left me feedback. It's just like the most lovely supporters over the course of like 6 years. Well, a lot of stuff happened, and in some cases I even became homeless. I was like struggling to even feed myself. I'm working on all kinds of other projects to just try to make a living. And those situations put a lot of strain on my ability to continue learning my languages in the way that I had been before. But there were also some very, very positive things that I decided to do in my life that also have resulted in the current circumstances. As many of you will know, I made a decision to write a book, and that book took an absolutely enormous amount of my sort of creative energy. And for the 18 months, almost 2 years I was working on that book, I sacrificed an enormous amount of my language learning time. Now, it just so happened that during that time, I had also decided to teach myself software development because I wanted to build some really amazing, awesome, helpful resources and tools for all of you. And so there was like a 1-year period where I was spending a ton of time on the book, teaching myself how to design books, how to do print layout and all these other things. I was teaching myself the fundamentals of coding and programming and how to build really cool software. I was running my business, trying to teach languages to people and make a living. And I was also working a full-time job at a coffee shop for much of that time so I could actually pay my bills. That was a time where I was waking up at like 4 a.m. just to squeeze in 30 minutes of programming study before I would bike to my job at the coffee shop. And I would come home and try to squeeze in 30 more minutes to work on my book, and then I would pass out. One time it got so bad that I actually scalded myself all over my legs because I had made some hot tea to try to stay awake, and I fell asleep and dragged the tea off of the desk onto my body. Now, right after I finished my book, as many of you will know, I took a huge decision to change careers, and I actually came to the San Francisco Bay Area to work as a software engineer, and I started working on Journaly. Now, I had no idea this would take me 2.5 years, but it has, and actually a large part of why it has taken me so long to build Journaly is because there have been such an enormous amount of things that I had to learn in order to build the tool that I wanted you to have. And to be honest, it has been a wonderful experience. Almost all the skills that I use at my current job and all the things that make me most valuable as a software developer right now, they're actually all things I learned from building Journaly. But all that to say, I've now spent about 3.5 or 4 years of my life really heavily dedicated to essentially learning how to build things and then trying to build things that I really hope will have a huge impact on the world of language learning. And the reality is, it's just been extremely difficult to make the amount of time that I would need to maintain such high levels in several languages, to continue improving all those other ones in the same way that I was able to when language learning was the only real thing in my life. So then what does all this mean? Is this me basically telling you, okay, so basically I suck? No, it doesn't mean that at all. Like I said, every accomplished polyglot that I have met over the years, they've all been through stuff like this. Now, of course, every person's circumstances are totally different and totally unique, and frankly, they're all amazing stories. But at the end of the day, the experience that you gain over the years of going through all of this and all of the language learning skill that you sort of accumulate, it doesn't go away. So like recently, I made a video where I spoke 8 languages. It was 100% spontaneous. I didn't plan it whatsoever. I literally finished filming one video, and then right afterwards, I just decided, what if I just speak all my languages right now? And I have to tell you, I was actually amazed at how well I did, even in my most rusty languages. Whenever I encounter somebody out in the wild and I actually have a chance to speak one of those languages, I'm always amazed at how well I'm actually still able to communicate, and how those fundamental skills of communicating in each different language, those are still there. And furthermore, every time I get back to a language, it is incredible how quickly it all comes back to me. And frankly, each one of those languages means so much more to me now because of how I've kept them in my life, and I've done my best to stick with them in spite of all the obstacles and challenges. And so the main point I want to make here is that it doesn't really matter that some of my language skills are rusty right now. It doesn't really matter that my French is just not quite as good as it used to be, or my Japanese, and it doesn't really matter that I didn't quite break through that language barrier yet with German or Portuguese, and it doesn't matter that I still haven't gotten back to Dutch. I was a better speaker of most of those languages at the end of 2016 when I made my very first 8-language video, but I am a far better language learner now than I was back then. I'm a far better educator now than I was back then. I'm a far better content creator than I was back then. My YouTube channel is way better than it was back then. And the cool thing is that Journaly is just about finished. It's gonna be coming out in just a few weeks. I have a whole bunch of these really big projects that are all gonna be done this year. And so the point is that yes, some stuff came up in life. I made some decisions, I made some sacrifices, and I think they were all super worth it. But again, for the purpose of this video, I still have the rest of my life to enjoy, embrace all those languages, and I have absolutely no doubt that I will get all of them back to where they were, and I'm gonna really just enjoy reliving those experiences and pushing those languages to higher levels than they ever were at before. And the cool thing is, as I always do, I'll be documenting the entire thing, and I assure you, it's gonna be a wild ride. So I hope that helps, just this sort of candid explanation of all the different ways that I have failed learning languages, and the reality is that they're not failures at all. And so I hope that that will resonate with some of you, and I hope it will help you to sort of see that if you don't manage to stay with one of your languages, if your Spanish gets rusty, or if your French isn't as good anymore, it is okay, it's completely human, and you're in very good company in terms of people that learned languages very successfully and had those exact same ups and downs. With that, I will leave you with one last good sip of coffee, and I'll see you back here for another episode of the Daily Language Diary.